Hi there, Melodie Moore here of Business Tech Ninjas, and today we're going to talk about employee turnover, specifically when it comes to managing and maintaining your tech-centric business. This is oftentimes a troubling point for clients that we work with, is that they have had a cowboy build out their tech systems at some point in time, or an internal team member, or maybe they've hired a couple different agencies. And then whether that team member chooses to move on with their life and do something else, or it's no longer fit with that agency, they find that they're having to retrain people, and that there's a lot of lost knowledge that ends up walking out the door in those particular instances. Now, if you're a business owner, this is a risk to your business. If you're an online tech-centric business, then your technical infrastructure is a lot like the house that you maintain. It is a physical. It's not a physical representation, but it's a digital representation of your business. And thus you want to make sure it's maintained well, and that no matter what happens with team members, that you can accurately maintain it going forward. And there's a couple tips I have about how to think about this, and then what to ask of your team members, whether it be an agency or your internal team members, to make sure you are protected as a business owner. The main thing that I would recommend is do your very best to make your system simple. Complexity is easier than it is to make something simple. So always be challenging your team of, how can we simplify this? Is this really necessary? Is this really necessary? And sometimes that can be difficult if somebody's not really familiar with the technology. Somebody that's not familiar with the technology or what those options are strategically will make things more complicated, because they're figuring out a way. They're figuring out a way to make it work. And oftentimes those figuring out of a way to make it work ends up making it more complicated than it really needs to be. If they can't explain and walk you through how a system is supposed to work or how it does, it's probably more complicated than it needs to be, or they don't really understand it enough. One of the patterns that we see with people are cowboys or rogue agents when they're developing out technical systems is that it's totally clear in my mind, is kind of what they'll say. And they don't want to take the time to explain it to you, because you just won't get it. You just won't understand. And there's a difference between formal and informal logical reasoning. Informal logical reasoning is, yeah, it's clear in my head. But when somebody actually takes the time to sit down and either flowchart that out or write it out, they can see the holes in their logic. And as a business owner, you really do need at least some level of understanding of how or what these systems are and what tools that they use. Otherwise, it's a risk to your business, because if that person walks out the door, then what do you do at that point in time? So really asking them, can they explain what's happening? And to that end, documentation is not something you do later at some other endpoint. Documentation is part of the task. We do a structure, what we call assets. We use a project management system called ClickUp, where it makes it so that when you are building something out or changing something, part of what your work is updating those assets and organization, so that you can see a history of what's been changed on a particular tech asset or system. And you can also see why it was set up in the way it was. Additionally, how is it supposed to work? One of the biggest challenges with troubleshooting something is that nobody actually knows how it's supposed to work in the first place. So you have to go back to that cowboy and say, okay, well, how is this supposed to work? And they're like, it's in my head. And then they'll go in it and maybe be able to figure it out, but that can sometimes take hours. So it's really an inefficiency in being able to solve problems consistently and well, and then also an overdependence on a one person or potentially one external agency. So you really want to, as a business, in order to protect yourself, I like calling them assets. Because it really is an asset as a business owner. Your systems and your processes as a tech-centric business really do become those assets, and refining those out and making those better and making them as solid and simple as possible is going to make your business a lot stronger. And it's also going to help mitigate down any risk of turnover that you have with team members, because as much as we'd like to think that our businesses are going to be the place that team want to stay with us forever, they have their own lives, they have their own things going on. We want to make sure that the business that we're running is solid enough that we can give team members what they need to know when they're coming into a role, and then also keep that knowledge within the business should they choose to leave at some point in time. If you're looking for some help on this, it's my jam at Business Tech Ninjas. You can reach out to us, hello@businesstechninjas.com.